overthrow of Guatemala's government was?
In 1954, the CIA, or Central Intelligence Agency, orchestrated the overthrow of Guatemala's democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenez Guzman. The coup d'etat installed the military dictatorship of Carlos Castillo Armas.
What were the reasons or causes of this overthrow?
The United Fruit Company, or UFC, engaged in an influential lobbying campaign to persuade the U.S. to overthrow the Guatemalan government because of land that they wanted in Guatemala that was given to peasants by the former president. The main reason that the U.S. invaded was to stop communism from forming in Guatemala, which had become a taboo subject in the United States at the time. We interviewed some present students at Bowles to see if those feelings have changed.
Mr. McGraw, what are your opinions on communism?
It does seem like a good thing.
Why?
Everybody's been just government power, period.
Do you think that the United States should be able to overthrow communist governments?
No.
Actually, I'm pretty confident about stuff with communism. It's socialism. And every socialist in this nation is a communist. Bernie Sanders, communist. Donald Trump, communist. Kamala Harris, communist.
As you can see, even in the present day, feelings about communism are very strong, which is a key reason why the United States felt the need to invade Guatemala. Here is a brief timeline of the start of U.S. occupancy in Guatemala to the presidency of Armas. It all started with the Guatemalan Revolution, which was a pro-democracy movement that toppled Jorge Ubico's dictatorship. Then, UFC executive Edward Bernays cherry-picked evidence of communism to instigate U.S. involvement. The company demanded to be reimbursed for their land in Guatemala, but Arbenz aimed to redistribute unused land, including that of United Fruit, to landless peasants. This angered the company because they felt that that land was rightfully theirs, but instead it was being distributed to poor Guatemalans. And they thought that U.S. involvement would get their land back. Because of this information, U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower authorized the CIA to begin Operation PB Success. He was convinced by the UFC and planned to overthrow Arbenz. In 1945, the coup begins. The military efforts, combined with psychological warfare tactics like broadcasting propaganda and false reports of military success, resulted in American victory. The CIA went in and would drop pamphlets onto the ground to Guatemalans about communism and broadcast information, basically scaring them to overthrow their government. That was untrue. Castillo Armas then became president, and the United States now recognizes Guatemala as a government.
Today I'm here with Mikhail Hellman to ask him about the CIA overthrow of the Guatemalan government. So Mikhail, do you know why the CIA overthrew the Guatemalan government?
Yes, back in the early 1940s, the U.S. government were very anti-communist, and they thought Guatemala was heading that direction.
Very nice. So, do you know who was president at the time of this overthrow?
I am not 100% sure. Roosevelt, perhaps?
It was not Roosevelt. It was Eisenhower. And it was right after his election in 1952. And Eisenhower was focused on primarily anti-communism sentiments. And so he wanted to overthrow the potential threat the Guatemalan communist government had to America. So, in 1952, after his election, Eisenhower had received some intel that said that the president at the time's advisors were feeding him communist information and trying to make him become more and more communist. So he planned a coup d'etat, and the CIA had 480 trained men, led by Castillo Armas, to carry out Operation PB Success. Do you know what type of tactics they used in the overthrow?
I am not sure, but maybe some guerrilla tactics and fake news to
Oh my
have
goodness.
the citizens of that country turn against their own leaders.
That was a very good guess because, yes, they used psychological warfare because it turns out that the CIA is not very good with tactical and physical warfare. and their army performed really poorly when they fought against the Guatemalan troops. So instead, the United States had some fake news stories and posted propaganda to instill fear amongst the Guatemalan citizens to the point where the Guatemalan army could not fight against the United States Army because they were so frightened by being overtaken. Do you know what happened after the revolution?
I do not.
Basically, shortly after, Castillo, who was led and appointed by the CIA to become the new president, became a dictator, and he ruled in Guatemala and basically counteracted all of the United States' efforts to turn them into a democracy. Do you have any comment on that?
Sounds like a failed attempt.
But they did stop communism. So
they just had a dictator.
It was a dictator, yeah, but not communism. That was all. Thank you. The coup d'etat ended the Guatemalan Revolution, which had begun in 1944 after a popular uprising toppled military dictatorship of Jorge Ubico. The United States wanted to put an end to a so-called communist leader that had been installed. The United States installed a series of military authoritarian governments, which were also funded by them. These governments waged a war of repression against not just the guerrilla opposition that had sprung up to oppose them, but against the indigenous way of life in Guatemala as a whole. The civil war that erupted after the United States' intervention halted Guatemala's economic growth, ended their political independence, and allowed a corrupted ruling class to dominate the economy. Arguably, the worst humanitarian crisis of the Cold War came from the Guatemalan government, as they brutally tortured their citizens through massacres, executions, and rapes. Even though Guatemala was considered free from communism and had recognized freedom across the globe, the people in the country suffered detrimental effects after the United States' intervention. While we're unable to understand the lengths of economic, social, and political suffering that Guatemala might have faced if the United States did not intervene, the intervention brings up troubling issues that need to be addressed, such as the lives of Guatemalans after the coup d'etat. An American observer explains, quote, "In Guatemala City, unlicensed vans full of heavily armed men pull to a stop in broad daylight and kidnap another death squad victim. Mutilated bodies are dropped from helicopters on crowded stadiums to keep the population terrified. Those who dare ask about, quote, disappeared loved ones have their tongues cut out." While the United States was successful with putting a stop to communism, the ethics and morality of the coup remained debated. While the act displayed America as almost a savior from communism, it also illustrated the lengths of which the country would go to in order to instill any sort of democracy amongst other nations. The United States could not have known about the long-term impacts of the acts and was acting on heightened levels of communist worry due to the Red Scare. The overthrow was not to detriment the Guatemalan government, but rather as an attempt to save it from the threats communism imposed. As I stated before, we're not able to completely and thoroughly understand what would have happened to Guatemala if the United States did not intervene, and we're left to deal with the impact and choices that our country made.